Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our weekly show. It's a treat to be back here. Our special guest for this week is China Blue, a wonderful artist and composer, musician, scientist, and the show wouldn't be possible without our producer, Pamela Dickerson, who thought of this idea on Saturday call. Also, a young man named Anthony Demarbiex, and we should really see him if possible because he's not only an actor and someone who's a great comedian, writer, author, visionary, and being 32 years old, tuned in to today rather than the day before yesterday. And he's also our technical wizard who somehow rescues us from technological disaster and makes it possible to have something about Jack Kerouac and the era from whence he came and which I was lucky enough to be part of too. We have Norton Wisdom, a wonderful visual artist, and there you can see China Blue, who's gracious enough to come on from her new place in upstate New York. And you're going to hear her amazing story and music and philosophy later on. And of course, we have great James Canary, who is the keeper of the scroll that Jack Kerouac wrote for On the Road and takes that since 2007 all around the world, rolls it up, unrolls it, and keeps it healthy so that 100 years from now people can still see it. So we're doing a weekly reading of my book, Offbeat, collaborating with Kerouac, and we're going to continue coming into what they call in the non-literary circle in Spain, el home stretch, because we've only got 3 more readings and then we're done. Last week I spoke about all the stuff that we did when we made recordings together, and after he passed away, recordings that we made about his beautiful words with music and a new generation of people who were taking his spirit and creating in their own way rather than wearing berets and dark glasses with no lenses, paste on goatees, and pretending to be beatniks, which never existed until we were termed that later on. January 3rd, 2007, I began a tour, and we'll get to that next week. But this was the year 2001, a little earlier. This became a banner year for Jack Kerouac's legacy. Remember, he died in 1969. With the sale of his scroll for On the Road, the completion of his archives finally was placed in the New York Public Library. I realized that those of us left here who knew Jack and worked with him had an obligation to honor his memory. We also had to bear witness by sharing what we knew with anyone, from fans and scholars alike, in a responsible and an accurate way. Otherwise, the decades of misinformation and mythology would continue to obscure the remarkable spirit of the man who was our reporter. As I sit here writing this memoir, I can still hear Jack's voice. You can hear it too because he spoke exactly the way he wrote. I remember the letter he wrote to me about the cantata we did together called A Year in Our Land from Florida in 1965 after I had sent him a tape of the first performance at Town Hall. I told him we would do more work together. He saw the 1968 telecast of the piece, and we talked on the phone for nearly 2 hours. Towards the end of the conversation, I played the horn and the piano into the microphone so that we could do some long distance improvising together. We're still wailing, Jack, I said. Ah, Davy, we have to do more, he said. I'm tired, man. Fame is such a drag. I could hear the sadness in his voice, and even though I could still get him to chuckle, I sensed the overwhelming pain that seemed to engulf him. He talked about his new book, Vanity of Dulwaz. He said it was dedicated to his wife, Stella Sampas. He told me how she was saving his life and his mother's life. Someday we'll all get together, he said. If you ever settle down and get married, and we could all go off in the mountains, grow our own food, write an opera, and play music with the Indians while our wives look after our adoring children. Ah, man, c'est triste. It's sad. No one comes to see me or calls. Neil Cassidy's dead, but I'm writing. You'll have to read my new book, Davy. I can still write. I know that, Jack. Bien sûr. Absolutely, I said. Read it soon, Davy, he said. He knew I was always years late in reading his books. That was because being with him was exactly like reading his books. Often Jack would read to me favorite passages of whatever he had written or was writing over the phone, as he used to do over the years when we were together in New York City. Someday, Davy, when we're old men, we'll sit in hammocks and rock back and forth, picking our teeth and discussing our life's works. You can read all my published books, and I'll study your published symphony scores, and we'll show our grandchildren Pull My Daisy so they could see how crazy we were, and then we will play the recordings of our symphonic collaborations and leap from our hammocks to give an impromptu soiree seminar on the secret joys of music and poetry, filling the air with Mozartian delights. Ah, Davy, mon Dieu cher. Oh my God, dear Davy, I feel tired, man. Don't lose your energy. An artist must burn with a hard and gem-like flame. Let's keep that fire going and don't let that fire go out. Keep the flame alive. The ranks of the keepers of the flame were slowly being diminished. When Dodie Muller left us in the spring of 2001, I realized how lucky we were to have known her and how lucky Jack was to have had her bless his life, and what a joy it was to have all of us reunited at her 70th birthday on June 7th, 1998, just a few years earlier. Her daughter, Maya Muller, who was on our show, arranged a surprise party for her mom at 2 p.m. at the Frontier Restaurant in New York City. I knew it would be a chance to honor Dodie and see a lot of wonderful people again. Richard Bellamy, who had played the bishop in Pull My Daisy, was there, looking very much as he did in 1959, full of humor and warmth. Lucian Carr came with his children all grown up, now looking like a patriarch sea captain with the beard. His son Simon, an accomplished artist, gave an announcement of his art show. I remembered Simon as a child staying up late as Jack and I played music with Lucian and carried on till dawn. Lucian's ex-wife, Sessa, still close to him, greeted me warmly. Sessa, I said, here we are at an afternoon party. It's the first time I can remember saying hello to you in the daylight. We're maturing now, she said, laughing. When I finally got to sit down with Lucian, he said, I'm sailing a lot now. I live in Washington, D.C. Don't drink anymore. I have a good life. I'll never forget all the parties and all the music at your house when Jack would come to town, I said. We've got so many ideas for things that we could do at those jam sessions of yours. They went on for hours. Jack never read or scat sang better than he did when we were carrying on at your house. Jack loved music, said Lucian. He always felt it and understood it. All kinds of music. That's why his writing has such rhythm, I said. His prose really swings, as we used to say. Now, my kids would say it rocks. However, they say it's still damn good, said Lucian. Imagine if he were alive today to see how much he's appreciated. Wouldn't it be great if he were here with us for Dodie's birthday? I'm so glad we can honor Dodie, I said. Jack really loves her, and I guess we all do. She's all spirit. I talked to Lucian about the new era that seemed to be dawning, about the enormous number of young people I kept meeting who gravitated towards what we did because they sensed there was a generation and an era where a lot of people felt a connection to a higher purpose and mission in life more than just staring in the mirror. There was music, art, theater, poetry, and dance that still makes your heart stand still and is now being appreciated. Almost as though Alice from Alice's Adventures in Wonderland were checking us all out on a time machine. It's kind of like that it is now, I said, like we used to remind each other every day. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. I said to Lucian when I spoke to him and about Doug Brinkley's new book and how important it would be to talk to Doug. He's interested in Jack from the viewpoint of a historian. He's interested in Jack's place in the history of America and the changes he helped to shape. You and Dodie are both so important in Jack's life, and neither of you have been included in a meaningful way in most of the recent books about our era, except for the most important ones, the books that Jack wrote himself. If you'd agree to talk to Doug, I promise he won't come on like a tabloid scandal sheet reporter looking for sleaze and dirt. He truly respects Jack's works and the importance of him as a major artist. I think his book will change everything. He'll remove Jack from the penitentiary of the Beat generation. Doug will have full access to all of Jack's journals. We'll finally have a true picture of what he was about. Jack himself will be the #1 primary source. As Jack would say, it's never too late. You can give him my number, said Lucian. I'll speak to him. I managed to get a few minutes alone with Dodie. I loved Jack, she said. He was wonderful. He was so emotional. Sometimes it was almost like being with a dear woman friend. He always acted and reacted with feelings first. I don't know if we ever could have made it being married. I don't think his mother approved of me. He was so devoted to her. I still think about him. We all had so much fun making Pull My Daisy together. I want to come up with Maya and see your farm and the rest of your family. Jack always talked about living that way. I'm so glad we can all be together again, I said. Alfred Leslie, who made the film, is out of town, or he would be here. Your daughter Maya is fantastic, and the way she got this all together. I'm proud of her, said Dodie. She's not only beautiful, she's a really good person. I think we did damn well with our children. Your daughters are both fine young ladies, and your son, a wonderful young boy. We certainly don't fit the official Beat image, I said. You better believe that, said Dodie. I don't even pay attention to any of that. I never did. We were artists, and we remain artists. Jack's work had nothing to do with that. Why do you suppose they denigrated him all these years, bringing him down with that beatnik myth? I asked. Were they jealous? He was too damn good, said Dodie. They just couldn't handle it, and he was too damn real. Here's the epilogue, and then we have our wonderful guest. Now's the time. It's a joy as well as a blessing to still be here in 2008. In 2008, January 17th, the New York Public Library held a gala event for the public celebrating the 50th anniversary of the publication of On the Road, which actually took place in 2007. The gala was hosted by James Irsay, the owner of the original scroll for On the Road. I was invited to participate, and I was able to see Jack get his final due in a spectacular evening. The New York Public Library was the capstone of the rediscovery of Jack and his work. Just looking back at all the myriad events of 2007, which took place throughout the world, It was a dizzying experience in itself. However, now, when I look back at the year 2002, the year when I finished the first incarnation of this book, I most remember looking forward to the distant year of 2007 and wondering if I would make it to be there when Jack's overdue glory was surely finally to come. Don't worry about the mileage on your speedometer, I was told by Victor Venegas, my old Army buddy and bass player for 30 years. Age is just statistics. You'll make it to 77 without even thinking about it. The key to staying alive is living each day as if it's your last, and then waking up the next morning and laughing. 2007 is just a number. You remember what Charlie Parker taught us all. Now's the time. Later with old age and the calendar. That don't apply to us young cats. Just be sure you got the right day and month when you write it down and when our next gig is, and always make a note for the deadline of whatever symphony you're composing. Be sure to put it clearly in your date book. 2007 is only 5 years away. It's right around the corner. As usual, Victor was right. 2007 showed up right on time. Victor reminded me that when you live in New York, everything in the future will be on schedule. For most of the world, Western culture determines our particular version of the calendar. We're caught up by what our calendar is only being the accurate keeper of time. It's easy to forget that many places in the world have their own calendars, many of which are thousands of years older than ours. Jack was interested in the ancient Aztec calendar. Gary Snyder and Phil Whalen were serious students of Asian cultures, all of which have their own systems of recording the passage of time. Dizzy Gillespie and John Coltrane shared with me their interest in the Egyptian calendar from 4236 BC, based on the stars and the moon's relative position to the earth. They each talked to me about that over the years. My Uncle David, a merchant seaman and world traveler, often told me that as a little boy, when I was a little boy, about the many places in the world which are still inhabited by people whose traditions and history are devoid of any type of calendar at all. But regardless of whose calendar you subscribe to, the year 2002, when I finished Offbeat, makes me feel that this particular year had a balance and appeal of its own. With the perfect balance of numbers, I wondered if 2002 made some people yearn for the good old days of 2001. Turkey in 2008. Today, in 2008, the stark beauty of 2002 can only make you imagine what it will be like for those lucky souls and fans of numerology for the future who will be lucky enough to see the fireworks and excitement that will surely erupt all over the globe during the mammoth 1950s bring your own bottle party style that will usher in the year 3003. As 2002 arrived, I knew I wasn't going to make it till 3003. My hope was I would still be around in 2007 to celebrate Jack's big year. This was when the 50th anniversary of the publication of On the Road was going to be celebrated around the world. I felt relieved when Victor Venegas assured me that I would be. Like so many other of Jack's old friends, I wanted to be there and see him finally get his due. As we all know, Jack died in 1969 with most of his work out of print, but he never gave up hope. After the initial phenomenal success of the book in 1957, Jack continued writing some of his best books. But if you believed what the literary establishment told us, his star had faded shortly after the book's initial success. In the 60s, 70s, and early 80s, we were informed that he was a one-hit wonder, a speed typist, and not even worthy of being taught in any universities or high schools. I always told Jack that Bach was rediscovered 50 years after his greatest works were composed by Mendelssohn. So if Jack could wait it out, there would surely be a renaissance of not only on the road, but by all of his work, and that we would all have the chance to do our readings with music again as two old guys for an army of young people someday when the dust had settled. And I told him since there was an undocumented group of readers worldwide, they were there and already appreciated his writing. Moses was in the desert 40 years, Jack, I told him one night in one of our spontaneous soirees after the hostess of the marathon party had fallen asleep and we were still carrying on. Just wait. What goes around comes around. In 2007, you'll be like Moses, marching out of the desert, spreading joy and salvation. Moses scuffled for those 40 years, so you're right on schedule. Yeah, Davy, but now's the time, said Jack. I don't want to sit around till I'm 85 to be rediscovered. Don't worry, Jack, I said. You're right on schedule. That was easy for me to say, but Jack was understandably discouraged at the thought of such a long time between the celebrations of 1957 and a half a century in the desert that I described before his reincarnation and his welcome into the promised land of worldwide acclaim finally came. He needed to control his destiny at the moment as best he could. The baseball dynasties he created on small pieces of paper, which he first showed me at Dodie Muller's house in October of 1959 and maintained through the years with painstaking care, were to an extent his antidote to the frustration of not being able to control the passage of time or alter the setbacks of his hectful life. With his homemade fantasy baseball leagues, Jack was in complete control of everything. All the team's games, batting averages, and the accomplishments of all the athletes he had invented existed because he made them as an extension of his autobiographical writing. They became as real to him as the characters in his books, except that he was the only one ever who was supposed to read them. With those games, he was able to both create a series of sporting events and master time, place, and the careers of every player involved. If he couldn't control the outrageous Shakespearean forces of his own life, he could control the lives of all the members of his imaginary baseball teams and create the outcome of each game they played. He didn't have to gamble and pull numbers out of the hat. He was in total control, unlike taking the enormous risk that always comes when any of us dare to improvise or create art of any kind. Jack could remain and could determine every second of each game and never worry about failing. I never forgot that afternoon with him in 1959 at Dodie's house when he sheepishly pulled out the notebooks from a drawer and showed me these games. It all made perfect sense. In August of 2001, the wire services went wild when stories appeared that details of Jack's homemade baseball dynasties purchased from the estate by the New York Public Library were now available. Since the times I first met and saw those games, I often spoke about them over the years, but most people thought I was either delusional or that Jack's time spent pursuing these activities was an ex-football player's silly juvenile hobby, or just a sign that he was bored or had writer's block and could no longer create fiction to be read by others. I knew, as did his best friends, that this homemade sports dynasty was also influenced by his early days in Lowell, Massachusetts, as an outstanding high school athlete and promising young sports reporter for the Lowell Sun. When I met Paul Isaac Gurewitz at the New York Public Library and asked Isaac to call me. When we spoke, Isaac was very gracious and told me that I could come and see some of the material. As we talked, he was astonished when I described to him what I remembered about seeing the games in the notebooks that unforgettable afternoon in 1959, 42 years earlier. I told him how much I enjoyed seeing the imaginary baseball team from Pawtucket, Massachusetts, or one of the very many that Jack proudly showed me. You have some memory, he explained. So did Jack, I said. I'm not sure if it was Pawtucket, Massachusetts or Pawtucket, Rhode Island, but Jack remembered everything. Now that your library has acquired so much of his writings, journals, diaries, poems, paintings, and random notes, the world will be able to judge him on his own merits. They can see all the aspects of Jack as he documented his own experience and dreams. The preeminent Kerouac scholar of all time was Jack Kerouac himself. I find this all fascinating, Isaac told me. I want to know more about him as a person. Then come and tell all your friends to come to Lowell Celebrates Kerouac, I said. It happens the first weekend in October of every year. I'm going the first weekend of this October there, and the town welcomes people from all over the world each year to come and see the places Jack so lovingly described in so many of his books. You'll get to speak to people all over town whose voices sound the same as the way Jack's voices did. It's one of the few places in the Northeast, outside of rural Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire, where there's still a unique regional style of speech. There's even a unique form of the French language spoken there, retained from an old dialect rooted in traditional Quebecois culture, with a special Lowell flavor. In the 1960s, a scholar from Montreal called this Canadian style of French joual, but it was spoken for generations before that term was coined and is still spoken in many different ways throughout Canada today. Like all living languages, it's always changing, and there is a special way of speaking French that's specific to the Franco-Americans who came to Lowell from Quebec. Roger Brunel made me aware of this and explained to me the common misuse of the term joual, which is a recent term. Roger knew classical French, as Jack did, and he could also speak the same Lowell dialect that Jack's parents spoke at home. It doesn't have a name. According to Roger Brunel, who was brought up in Lowell, it is definitely not called joual. When Jack was growing up, the term hadn't been invented yet. These are some of the wonderful things you can learn by visiting Lowell. Roger gives tours during the festival through Centreville, where you can see the remnants of the old French-Canadian community of Jack's boyhood. He can also explain the subtle differences and nuances of the way French is spoken today by those who retain the Franco-American heritage. And Roger has translated some of the poetry that Jack wrote originally in French into English. Now new arrivals from other parts of the world have moved into the old neighborhoods of Lowell, but the old spirit is still there. All the languages spoken there today are part of Lowell's ever-changing tapestry. I'll try to come, said Isaac. Bring your friends, I said. They'll all feel welcome. Even Jack himself would feel welcome today. He's finally being acknowledged in the place that was the gyroscope of his life. I don't want to bankrupt the library with this phone call, but the things you should know, Isaac. Our place of birth is sacred to all of us, Davy, Jack used to say. Poor Thomas Wolfe. After his success, he was afraid to set foot in his hometown of Asheville, North Carolina. Now they have a statue of him there today. Someday they'll recognize me. Je m'en fous. I don't care. But Jack did care. Now Lowell cares, and as does the rest of the world. There's no street named after Neal Cassady in Denver yet, but he's immortalized in Jack's writings. Jack is now immortalized in Lowell. The Jack Kerouac commemorative at Kerouac Park is the kind of recognition that Jack always searched for. A park as beautiful as Stonehenge in England. Small obelisk-shaped monuments are engraved with excerpts of his writing. etched in stone, ready for 2002 and 3003. As symmetrical as the numbers themselves, I can hardly wait to get back. This year, the festival honors Steve Allen and Gregory Corso, both of whom left us. I'm going to show excerpts of the film made with Steve Allen and me playing together for the Kerouac Writers' Residence in Orlando, Florida, speaking about Gregory's friendship with Jack and how all of us collaborated with one another. I think you would enjoy it, Isaac. You sound like you'll be busy, said Isaac. I wish I had time to come. The festival theme to usher in 2002 is called Cross Cultural Kerouac in Any Language, I said. What Jack and I talked about incessantly, what Dizzy Gillespie spent hours telling me way back in 1951 when I met him, what my Uncle David, the merchant seaman, instilled on me before I could even read and write, what I myself have tried to share with others is that we must honor the beauty and shared humanity that surrounds us every day. This open-hearted spirit that fills the pages of his books are now being celebrated in Jack's hometown. It's open for all local residents and everyone visiting Lowell. The whole town takes part in the festival for the weekend. Isaac, I wish you all strength and energy in putting together all this new material at the New York Public Library. I understand that in 2005, the whole world will have access to it. And as my friend Victor Venegas would say, that's really right around the corner. And after saying goodbye to Isaac, I hung up the phone and I began to look at the program that the festival organizer, Lawrence Carradini, has sent to me. He and his wife Meg Smith, a journalist and dancer, were responsible as part of a large group who have made this annual event the premier tribute to Kerouac since the 80s. Even though it was months away, I began to plan my annual trip to the festival and made notes to myself on an imaginary blackboard in my mind to act as a bulletin board for what I would try to do each day. And we're going to mention next week all about that wonderful time when Jack was finally rediscovered. But now we have the greatest joy, which is to have our wonderful guest very shortly come on, this China Blue, terrific artist, an old friend, a former ballet dancer, someone who's done extraordinary work in her life in the worlds of science, improvised and composed music, visual arts, and encouraging other people to try to work hard and do something while they're here. And we want to, again, for those of you who tuned in late, thank Pamela Dickerson, who made this show possible, for Anthony Demarbiex, the heroic technical advisor and keeper of the flame that somehow enables us to escape from the jaws of disaster no matter what happens in cyberspace and get through each program since September. Also, Norton Wisdom, a wonderful visual artist who creates on the spot and enlightens and helps us out. And the fabulous James Canary, who's been with us on every program and will be our special guest again. He was the first special guest next week to talk about working with the scroll, working with Jack, and anything else that he has in mind, all of which will be interesting. And we really want to know what a joy it is. And I'd like, before Pamela comes on, I just want to thank, with her busy schedule, China Blue for taking out her time with all she has to do in life in order to enlighten us with her presence. And now, if we'd like to introduce you to the person who thought of doing this show, who's the creative director, and she will tell you what is coming up next. And if what we planned on coming up next doesn't come up next, that's cool too, because we're not only hard workers and planners, everyone understands the necessity of improvisation, not just in jazz, but for survival in life. Miss Pamela Dickerson.
Hello. Gosh, David, I really feel you gave me this big intro today, and I just felt this transmutation of time, of being with you as a cosmic artist in another era, and Kerouac being there, and it's such just an honor to be here with you every week, David, and Norton and Jim Canary and our special guest China and Anthony putting this together for us, and everyone, Hassan, and you know, I could name you all. We love you, and we're very blessed to have this friendship during a time where everyone's kind of been closed down or alone. And I've looked forward to it every week, and we've got 2 more shows. So thank you, and see you there. I'm very excited about our guest this week. It's interesting how you can go in different directions by who's David's friend. And we have the privilege of having China Blue, which is going off more into a science direction and another way of being completely creative. So welcome. You have an extraordinary amount of credits. Okay, I'm going to say hello to you first. And then once you get talking, I'm going to read them off because we didn't have them prior to the show. Welcome, China Blue. You unmic yourself at the bottom left corner. Yes.
There,
yes.
I got it.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you, Pamela.
Thank you for being here, China. You just moved yesterday, so
yeah.
You feeling good?
Oh, I'm feeling wonderful being surrounded by boxes. But I don't mind because I'm happy to be in the Hudson Valley, and this is where all of my friends are located. So I'm so happy to be closer to my friends. It's such a critical point in my life to have this, to be here. And I've always wanted to actually live here, but at this particular point in my life, it's particularly so important for me to be surrounded by the love of my friends. They are my family.
So we had a conversation in rehearsal, and sometimes things come to me. I don't know if I should say it or not. I would like to say, in the infinite great spirit of love, light, thank you to Lawrence Ferlinghetti, and much love and peace and poetry and gratitude for everything that you are as your own poet, and to just us having a voice and being able to speak and be allowed to do that. I appreciate you infinitely, galactically. And within that space, I wanted to also say to you, China Blue, that I send the biggest spirit condolences to you. And this big move that you've done, and you've explained that the love of your life, who you have done this music with, that we're going to hear in a little bit, and this transmutation of time and space that's going on with you. I want to hold space with you for this show because we're holding space for Lawrence, and that's what I want to say. Peace to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Pamela. And yes, I did want to say that Lawrence Ferlinghetti was an amazing person. And you know, what I remember so much about him was his presence every single day at City Lights Books, the bookstore that he had in San Francisco. I think it was on Sutter Street. Do you remember, David?
It was right up in North Beach, right off.
Yeah, in North Beach. Right. Now I can see it. I wish you could see it too. wish I could bring the picture back to you, but it was an amazing place because it was so special, and people would come all over the world to visit it, to get inspired by being there, to hopefully meet him, and to this day, even a couple of days ago, I noticed online where a friend of mine who still lives in the San Francisco area was saying, "Oh yes, I stopped in at City Lights again today." And it's his presence, I think, that is so meaningful for everybody, even in his passing. And it's the way he's marked his life is an ongoing inspiration for everybody. So that's about all I have to say on that.
Well, the other thing was so amazing about him was like Jack and like yourself and a lot of other people, he didn't have a build up a wall around his presence where you needed a can opener to say hello or to smile. He was just for real. He
Yeah.
did, as they say, as Chris Felver, who was on the program, his old buddy, said, he didn't tolerate fools. But if you were polite and had anything remotely to offer, just as a human being, that was your introduction. He just hung out with anybody and everybody. And at the store, he never treated himself like a toy, you know, attraction or a rock and roll star where you had to speak to 11 people in order to be in his presence. And a lot of young writers and people that weren't writers, even composers like myself and anybody, he would always make a good suggestion after he knew you about your work very briefly and drop a big bomb or a mantra on you saying, get real, make it simple. He knew just what to do to help you to be better. And of course, as you know from the wonderful write up in the Times, he said he was not, ever was, never would be a beat when he came to San Francisco way back. He was wearing a beret because he'd just come from the Sorbonne where he had studied. And he said, I was more of a bohemian. And while he published the works of so many people that we now call beat, he himself didn't was revolted by that label. He and Gary Snyder, if there was called beat artists, wouldn't go to the event because they felt that they were more than that. So in an age of stereotypes, he managed to just hang in there. And he was also so socially committed to all kinds of things. But you know that because you were brought up in San Francisco. I just was a visitor.
Oh yeah. I mean, that was the nature of life in the San Francisco Bay Area, and that people normally did many different types of things. I think as since that era, uh, people have gravitated to becoming specialists, and they're rewarded to being specialists, and that narrows their field to focusing on only one thing. But at that particular time, people did everything. They were musicians first, then they were poets, then they were gurus. Yeah, and you mix it all together and you see what comes out the other end. But there were no limits to, no sense of limit, I guess I should say, of what you should be as a human being and what your existence should be. And that there was no predetermination like today, where I hear so many times where parents are planning from before their children are born exactly where they're going to college and what their schooling is going to be about. Certainly none of that existed then.
Well, that's kind of taking the real estate developer called in some quarters a shyster or a goner for a crook, deal in their work habits, and they try to inflict that on their kids. And it's all part of the same uneducated, miserable, anti-human approach towards living. And if you feel that nothing's important except having more than you were considered possible to achieve or to gain or to have more, then you never have enough. Most drug addicts, when you ask
We
them,
freeze or just David? We all freeze?
oh, whenever they say,
we were frozen. I didn't know if it was all of us.
oh, okay.
Sorry.
Very many drug addicts always say, when they finally get recovered, how could you do that to yourself? The response is, it was never enough. And that's basically why some people bring up their kids, because they say, well, man, I'm going to do better than anybody expected through my children, and make the children their object, their investment. And I've found out with my own kids and other people's kids whom I love to hang out with, and with Richard Bellamy, who mentioned Pull My Daisy.
May I ask the audience, is my voice frozen also?
No.
Only
we can
David's
hear you.
voice is frozen?
Well, folks,
No, I can hear
David.
David. I
is
can
it,
hear David.
is that better? Oh, well, for those of you who couldn't
Yes,
hear me,
that's way better.
okay, I'll speak
Sorry.
into the microphone like a Borscht Belt comic. Is this better?
Yes.
That's
Yes.
Okay, good.
wonderful. Thank you.
Marvelous. Very briefly, China, thank you for what you said. And I feel sorry for the parents who feel that way because they won't have the joy of their kids having that precious hangoutology when they get older. And then even wanting their kids, known as your grandkids, to see you not as a doddering old wreck that will give them a lollipop or a trust fund or their extra shoes when they pass away, but rather people who are part of the family. And most places in the world where people have almost nothing and places where they have a lot, they got that figured out. And that's something we can all learn from. And I know San
Oh,
Francisco,
for
when
sure.
you grew up, was notorious. That's why so many people moved there, not just for the scenery, but for the humanists.
No, for the pot. They just moved there for the drugs.
No,
but
but I
but really it was an experience of of willing to delve into so many different whatever was available, and there was so much available. And in comparison to now, it's the consumerism of our society that has, I think, focused people into having more. Your what you were talking about, the idea of having more in terms of possessions, but we had so much then that where in terms of ideas and information and models to develop and people to follow. There are so many people that can give us information and give us new ideas and directions in our lives, but the way our society has formed people, it's very, very difficult for people to think outside of the societal pressures that
There's
come
some
bearing
delay,
down
I
on
think.
us. And is there a problem now? Is there a technology problem? I think
I
everybody's
could hear.
frozen, right?
No,
we
I
it's a
back
could.
problem.
on?
I heard it on David. Now it's starting happening.
Oh, yes, I
No,
can
I
see
didn't
it
say
coming
anything.
Yes,
You
up.
I
were
hear you
terrific.
clearly now.
Good. It's good.
Oh, there's Jim Canary.
And I think it's, for me, it's
Is
been that,
everything fine except own?
What?
I was going to say, for me, it's that background that's given me the encouragement to go ahead and delve as a scientist, as an artist, delve into weird realms like science.
Yeah, because they forgot to mention that you're an amazing composer. And were years ago when you were just starting to do that and making all kinds of original stuff. I never knew anybody to do that before except Marisol when she used some of my music in a moving horse. That was one tiny little thing, but you've had all kinds of things way 15, 20 years ago that no one was doing. And you're still doing that today. And that's very interesting and also very inspiring for anybody. If anybody's a teenager and you're up this late, you could see someone who's been doing that for a long time. So if you have a vision of something you feel you care about, you're not crazy. You're just following what you feel you were put here to do. And you've been doing that your whole life, China, and we all take our hat off to you.
Yeah.
I
Oh
can't take
gosh,
this hat
that's
off because I need a
that's very
haircut.
sweet of you, David. It's a very narrow genre in visual art that I stepped into. It's called sound art, and where visual artists take on the realm of sound. And when I started doing it, I didn't know anything about the technology involved in behind sound and managing sound. I didn't know anything about microphones and how to connect them to some kind of recording device. And I had to learn about all the different. At the time, I had a little. It was a Sony recording device that recorded onto little discs. And that's what that was my first, I can see you. Yes, James, you
Yeah.
know that one.
Yeah, this is great.
It's cute. I liked it because it could fit into my pocket, and I would walk around and use that and experiment just with sounds. And then people were introducing me to all the techniques and the machines behind recording. And only about maybe 3 or 5 years later did I know that there was a whole industry around it. That it was part and parcel of the music industry to become, to be managing all this equipment. But I was just fumbling my way through it because I'm first and foremost a visual artist, and what my interest in it was to use sound as a way, and it was basically based on the feng shui idea, which is from the Chinese culture of filling space with energy. And my interest was to use the energy of sound to fill a space, to energize it, and to create a positive environment. So that was my jumping off point for being involved with sound. I never anticipated or aspired to be a composer.
I don't think anybody does. It's just something that you naturally gravitate towards. And when Ravel wrote his La Mer, that's before they had recording machines. And I don't think even oceanography was that developed as a popular scientific art. But man, when you hear La Mer and you hear some of the music of Debussy and the music of Ravel and those composers who painted nature and sound, as they say in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, high scholarship European circles of classical music, look out, because it's heavy and it sounds unique. And hopefully, if the oceans haven't dried up in 200 years and there's still some symphony orchestras playing, which there will be, they'll just be run differently, you're going to hear Ravel's La Mer, and people are going to say, man, that's just like being out in the ocean at midnight. And that's all sound. He wrote the stuff down on a piece of paper, and orchestras can actually play that. And,
Wow.
and Beethoven's Symphony Pastoral, he had the storm scene, and you hear this, you could see when there's a rainbow and hear the cuckoo singing after the storm. And a lot of music critics said, wow, that's program music, therefore it sucks. That wasn't quite the language they used, but that's essentially. Beethoven responded in a letter saying, I'm not writing for you. I'm writing for now and for the future.
Whoa.
So that's what you're doing, and that's what should inspire, and that's what Jack did, and that's what everybody does whose stuff resonates, tells a story, and makes you feel something.
How did you start getting involved with objects like the Eiffel Tower and thinking about the sound within those spaces?
Well, it was just a fluke, really. I went on a trip to Paris that my then boyfriend, who became my husband, decided to tag along. And I was kind of miffed that he wanted to do that because we didn't know each other that well. But I thought, okay, well, now he's coming along. Let's see how well this is going to go. You see, I'm a bit cynical. And so I realized, well, he's never been to Paris before. I'd been to Paris a number of times. And I thought that, well, it would probably be nice for him to experience being the Eiffel Tower, and let's go to the top of the Eiffel Tower. It wasn't interesting to me, mostly because of the fact that it's such a cliche, and it's such a touristy way to cite all of Paris by the image of the Eiffel Tower, or to say they've been to the Eiffel Tower. It just was of no interest to me. But I just thought, well, I'll go with him so he can have that experience. So we go at 9 o'clock in the morning, which I have to tell you is the best time to go. There are no lines at 9 o'clock in the morning. we get to the top of the Eiffel Tower. Oh no, before that moment, we're walking along the right bank, and there's the Eiffel Tower, and I was explaining to him what it looked, that there it was, and I'm sure he recognized it. And at that moment, I said, you know, it would be really interesting to record the Eiffel Tower. And, you know, that's one of those ideas that sort of flits in your brain and, you know, goes away. It just pops in, and then what happened was we went to the top of the Eiffel Tower, if I can continue the thread. And we were looking around, and he did a little memorial to his mother. He brought a photograph of his mother, and he did a little memorial to her because she had just passed away. And then he looked at me, and he got down on one knee with an outstretched arm. And I'm looking at him like, what the hell are you doing? And he had a ring, and he proposed to me. After knowing him for 3 months. 3 months.
Which means he brought the ring
With him.
Yes.
Which means he had it all planned out.
It's amazing. That's so beautiful. Every girl would wish for that.
I know. And it was long before this was done by, you know, celebrities. It paved the way for other celebrities to do it, right?
You didn't know you were inviting along your perfect proposal.
No. It was truly heaven sent.
Wonderful. And so when you record the sound,
but I'll continue to take you along the thread, which is
good.
After we got back, I just sat down and I thought, you know, that having an idea like that is one of those things where you can embrace it and run with it, or just drop it. And usually because they're so bizarre and so grandiose, you just don't even bother. And I thought, well, what would happen if? And that's been my latest mantra. What would happen if? And I just thought, well, let's go down this path and see how it unfolds. And I'll have to tell you, I don't leave myself open to life that easily. And so it was a lesson for me too, that to just leave myself open to whatever comes as I walk down a particular path. So the first thing I did was, okay, do I need to have authorization? Well, of course, it's France. Yes, of course you would have to do that. So I made a couple of efforts, and the first
Autorisation.
Comment?
Autorisation. Maybe someone could say it better than me.
Autorisation?
Yeah.
Oh, authorization. Yes, autorisation. Oui, c'est comme ça. So
I hope it's the same word. It's on.
Might or might not.
Anyways.
So I made a number of failed efforts, which I kind of anticipated. But through my failed efforts, I got closer and closer, and I got to the right person. And I was trying by email, which was a mistake. It just doesn't work well in France because people just want the personal touch. So I got on the phone and I started dialing up people. And I eventually got the right person. And she says, well, when do you want to come? I said, does this period of time work for you? Sure. I think we'll be there about 2 days. How is that? Fine. And I said, well, everywhere else I go, usually people want money to do something like this. Will you need a donation, a contribution? Do you need some cash? And she says, is it for your art? And I said, yes, of course not. James, don't you love that? Only in France, would you hear, of course not. And only in France would you hear, you want it for art? Of course. We will do it. So that was the beginning of the story. And I was able to get a team of 7 to help me. I showed up with this massive amount of equipment. By then I knew what most of it was. But I do have to say that my husband, my past husband, who was amazingly brilliant, he was, besides being a neuroscientist at Brown University, and he was also a former professional musician. He played the sax and the flute. But when he sort of naturally combined both realms, and he applied his musical knowledge to his science. So as a result, what happened was, when he was doing recordings, he was required to do, let me start again. In neuroscience, he was doing research on bats and how bats hear. So he figured out a way to record from the bat's brain by doing neurosurgery on the brain, putting implants in and recording onto specialized devices. So he had lots and lots of experience with specialized devices. So when we were going to the Eiffel Tower, he recommended a couple of non-traditional recording devices. One is what is called a geophone, which is used for measuring the earthquakes. And we used that, and we used binaural microphones, which record from the vantage point of the ears, so that you get a personalized experience. You can, and it's specific to the distance between the 2 ears and the shape of your ears, it's themselves. And I think there was another microphone. I can't think of what else there was right now. I think there were 3 types. But the geophone was the one that got the best results, and we actually attached it. Actually, he attached it directly onto one of the legs of the Eiffel Tower while he was crawling onto the Eiffel Tower, which everywhere it says, do not climb on the Eiffel Tower. There are signs everywhere. And he was climbing there at 9 o'clock in the morning, and he happened to be just above where the security guards were organizing for their day to plan, what they had to do. One of them stepped back while he was drinking his coffee in one hand and hanging on to his submachine gun that was wrapped over his chest. He looks up and he says, "Monsieur, arrête maintenant, arrête," which means stop right now. And Seth looks down, he's scared because he sees this guy with a machine gun. But he sees the cup of coffee and he thinks, okay, it's not too serious yet. So what he did was I was smart enough to give everybody a copy of the authorization in case we got separated from each other. So he says, "I have the paper. J'ai le papier." And it's totally French to say, "I have my papers." So in the end, it was all settled, and the police were too early to their meeting. They hadn't been informed yet that this was going to happen. But Seth used to enjoy telling everybody about how the fact that, he was almost shot at the Eiffel Tower from climbing on it.
China, that is fantastic. of the histoire. I mean, seriously, that is an ultimate Eiffel Tower story. First the guy in the airplane, then the proposal, then the, how extraordinary. And it's interesting because you specifically were not so interested in that object and have had the most like climactic experiences with it as anybody ever.
But Pamela, what happened finally was it was from that particular event that we were able to get what I call the voice of the Eiffel Tower. We were able to get this particular microphone picks up vibrations. So it was the vibrations of the iron, and through the iron, we could hear voices. We could hear the elevators going up and down the Eiffel Tower, the rumbling of the elevators, and also the wind as well as the rain against the metal. And so it was just this really complex, what couldn't be better called as a voice. So to top it all up, add that to the list.
Can I ask you a question, China? There's also that wonderful piece that you sent me in the email of the rings of Saturn, which most of us never heard of, and you somehow you got the sounds from that and find that in music. Gustav Holst wrote the planets, but nobody ever did anything like what you guys were doing.
Well, thank you, David. We went on to work with NASA, and I've done a number of projects with NASA, and I came up with this idea when one of the NASA probes was researching Saturn and looking down from above. If you imagine Saturn being the glob in the middle with all the rings going around, I looked at it and I was going, you know, that looks like a vinyl album to me. And that was the beginning of the search for, okay, I proposed, well, let's see if there are any sounds in the rings. We went down that path and we got a grant from NASA to see if there are any sounds in the ring. We found them. Yes, we found the sounds in the rings, and we made this album called Cassini's Dreams from it. That's the short version. And I have a little the liner notes here in front of me, and I can read them to you to give you the total summation of it. So Cassini's Dreams brings to life some fascinating unheard aspects of Saturn's rings. Since Galileo's first tenuous observations in 1610, and the Saturn system has remained a source of intrigue for centuries. To this day, Saturn is still one of the solar systems. Sorry about that. Solar systems. I lost my train. Prime objects of wonder. In 1997, we launched the Cassini probe in a 10-year voyage to study the Saturn system, closer than any human object had ever been before. Over its 20-year mission, Cassini sent back over 400 gigabytes of raw data, including 400,000 images of Saturn, her rings, and moons. The vast majority of this information was in the form of black and manipulated to form elegant full-color portraits and movies of the unearthly beauty of the Saturn system. However, the sheer magnitude of new information and the unexpected form much of it took begged for new ways to explore the planet and data. Cassini's Dreams is a rich audio experience built from raw data and artistic interpretation of the 2 decades of Cassini's tour. There she was our virtual eyes and ears on Saturn. As the probe swept past the gas giant, traveling above and below her rings, swooping down on the moons to fly through icy plumes, above methane oceans, past shepherd moons, guiding ring particles in their orbits and spying on propeller moons as they create delicate internal structures and waves. These were 2 decades of wonder and data collected until Cassini finally plunged into her death throes into the cold cloud tops of the planet itself. Cassini's Dreams lets you join Cassini in her exploration of the giant ringed planet 9 times as far from the sun as we are from the Earth. This album was first inspired by the image of Saturn and her rings. And as a visual artist, I looked at the image, and as I told you about the vinyl part. So I didn't mention that I imagined the gaps in the tracks as the spaces between the rings. Then, as you know me to be as a sound artist, I realized that to create the sounds of her rings would be a unique and exciting CD to produce.
It's utterly fantastic.
And Pamela, I also want to add, thank you so much. I also want to add that we did this as a collaborative project. And speaking back to David's point about collaboration and the beats, you know, this has been a theme throughout my artistic life, is to work in collaboration, and I enjoy them tremendously. This CD was produced with my husband, Seth Horowitz, myself, and Lance Massey, who is the amazing composer and the creator of the T-Mobile ringtone. Ba-da-da-da-da. Yeah, and he got that from Bach.
He did,
You know,
and admitted it.
And admitted it. Think about it. Ba 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 ba. Just speed it up.
What do you think, Davey?
Well, as I said last week, we were taught in school, boom, 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 boom. Beethoven, unlike the rest of us poor Slavs, was a divine person. Therefore, he had a direct cell phone connection to God. And the anvil of fate was boom, 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 boom. Actually, it was his landlady saying, Ludwig, please pay your rent. However, there's simple things like the Messiaens les oiseaux exotiques actually gives bird sounds, and he made a great, great piece out of that. And so many composers took things that we wouldn't even consider to be in the Achtung, you Schwein music tradition, and found out that now with the internet, World Wide Web, you could see all the amazing music's made on Earth, and the Native American people take bird sounds, animal sounds, and make gorgeous music out of that. In Asia,
yeah.
some of the most ancient music is based on those sounds, and now we can not only go on the beautiful Mother Earth, we can go into outer space, not for real estate development, mining, water rights, or exploitation to make $1 trillion, but just for the beauty of the infinite enormity of the universe, and find out that there's music everywhere. And music has nothing to do with the business franchising. That's fine if you're just selling a lot of worthless crap. And I don't ever offend people who want to support their families, and neither did Jack Kerouac or anybody. We weren't against anything. We were for knowledge and exploration. So for the young people who might be watching who say, man, I'm interested in some of that stuff, and everybody says I'm crazy or couldn't be good, follow those dreams and that interest, and you never learn enough, and you never know enough, and you can make a contribution too, just the way China did. And if someone else comes along and you foster creativity in them, that's important, just as important as what you do yourself.
Yay.
As they say, I have spoken, because I came tonight to hear China talk. And maybe she and Canary could say something about their common bond of, like myself, and I've already spoken enough about San Francisco and the art scene, and how the open-mindedness and exploration that China mentioned is something that is there and will be there, even if there's another earthquake and all those big buildings made by hedge fund operators fall down because the markets fall down and then nobody wants to pay all that rent. None of that stuff matters. There's that spirit, Spirit, that exists, always has existed, and I'm sure it's in outer space, and it's everywhere. It's in the universe, and that's what music celebrates: life and creativity and the beauty that surrounds us. and you've done that, China, is wonderful because we never had anybody who did electronic music, but you're not electronic music. You're music that uses electrons. Jimi Hendrix didn't say, I'm an electronic composer. He used feedback and he used electronic effects for his purposes because he was saying something. And the whole way of playing the guitar changed and the music scene changed, but he was an artist with a background in playing with the great old rock and rollers and the doo-wop singers and the originators of that beautiful art form, and created something brand new. And that's continuing all the time in every genre of music. And I was considered to be a psychotic nutcase because I used folk music and Native American music and jazz, things that I learned, never dreaming I would put them in a symphony, and said, man, that killed me. I got to do something with that. And that's the way you talked about fumbling and stumbling. We all, if we're living right, fumble and stumble into everything that's good. And if it touches our heart, that means we got to know more about it. Case dismissed.
Well, yeah, I think that's very, very true. For me, it's turned out that way. I used to think that life had to be planned out and you would follow a plan, and of course, that's not the case. You can't plan your life no matter what. You can just hope that it takes the right direction and makes you feel good.
Amen.
And that's what I realized, is that as long as I'm enjoying myself and as long as it's bringing me pleasure, then I've got to be on a good path.
Oh,
So, and I do that in terms of my artwork too. I don't think I've stumbled too far away from my original focus, which is to fill spaces with sounds, because now we're filling, this space between us with sounds, whether it's our voices or the music that we play. It's all, as they say, good vibrations. Back to you, David.
Well, I was thinking, but what Jim, from the times I've known him, I don't think ever planned on becoming the conservator of the scroll of Jack Kerouac's original gigantic series of 10, 12-foot long papers that he wrote on the road on. And yet he ended up doing it. And the guy who asked him, James Irsay, he not only owns the Baltimore Colts, but had all kinds of wonderful, successful businesses, was such a big fan of Bob Dylan that he got into being interested in Kerouac because Bob Dylan loving Kerouac so much, he ended up buying the scroll, and instead of putting it in the vault, which he's entitled to, is his $2.4 million. He has a right to do whatever he wants with that. He's sending it around the world, and he got this guy, Jim Canary, and now Jim goes all around the world celebrating and helping people celebrate this beautiful writing. To best of my knowledge, I don't think Jim ever planned, someday if I play my cards right, I will be the conservator of Jack Kerouac's scroll. First of all, Jack hadn't written the scroll. And secondly, when he did, no one knew about it. So Jim, maybe you could comment with China about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, well, I first read On the Road in '69, the year that Jack passed away. And it had such a profound influence that when I graduated high school in '71, I hitchhiked immediately out to San Francisco, and City Lights was in my beacon. That was where I wanted to go. And I'd been very interested in poetry and finding all of these chapbooks and these wonderful small press publications that were going on at that time.
Mhm.
So I made a huge collection myself. And then my house burned and I lost all of that. But I'm kind of a Velcro person. Stuff comes and clings to me. So no one would ever guess that I'd lost everything when you look around here and all the things that have come to me since then. And they can all go away again. It really doesn't make much difference. But one thing that I was thinking about when I was in Paris with the scroll the first time, I met a man, an artist, and he was interested. He had this really unique idea of artwork for what's that space station up there? The one that it's going around.
The ISS.
Yes, and they were very interested in having some art, but it had to be really, not add any weight or anything.
Tiny.
Yeah. And so he had this brilliant idea. I don't know what he's done with it since then. I've lost track of him, but he took photos of the scroll and he was interested. I don't know if you know about typesetting and all this idea of
Mhm.
rivers. And you know how sometimes your eye will wander all the blank spaces in between words. So he mapped all of that. He said we could etch that out of the metal. So it would be actually removing weight. And they were beautiful. And it had nothing to do with the words or the text, but it was just another way of looking at the same thing that we look at and think about. I thought it was brilliant. And I still have some images that he sent me of
Oh,
his
nice.
mappings of the rivers between in the text, you know. But yeah, we can all look at the same thing and see something different.
I wonder what the sound would have been going between those if it was typeset.
Yeah, I would love to have been able to hear the sound of him typing. That would have been really
Yeah,
incredible.
yeah, that would have been interesting.
Many of the exhibits have had, well, I think in Orlando, they had a recording of typewriters. So you walk into the room with the scroll and you're immediately taken up by the sound of typing.
Nice.
In San Francisco, or not San Francisco, Santa Fe, New Mexico, they had it, and they had a whole room next to the scroll full of typewriters, and people could type. Many people young people hadn't ever experienced a typewriter. They would
Right.
type, so you would hear that coming as you were walking in the gallery. And then anything that they typed, they had clipboards all over on the walls, and they could put up their poems or their response to seeing the scroll, and it was beautiful. This nice interaction of the object and its inspiration, and then what you do with it is what
Mhm.
it's been all about. And I think that's what Jim, the owner, has wanted to see happen, rather than again locking it in a safe. What is that, right? So
Yeah.
I wanted to ask China a question about ballet. If ballet in some way influenced your thoughts on sound.
Well, my story about ballet begins when I was 3. I started dancing. My doctor sent me to a ballet teacher to basically strengthen my feet because they weren't developing properly. So that was his recommendation. That was his prescription to my mother. So that's why I started at 3. And I had that evolved into a career. I was dancing with the San Francisco Ballet Opera Company as a young teenager, and uh, and it was it was a career that I was excited to have. But fast forward to now, you know, as you know, with dance, that dancers' careers are usually very short. But what I what I picked up from dance was that it was the music and the sounds that drove me across the room, that filled a room and filled the space. And that was one of the things that I still, you know, sort of savor about dancing, is that and how the vibrations fill the body, because you can really it because usually the music is very loud, and it was just it's the visceral feeling of the motion and the vibrations that somehow I translated into sound and into working with sound. It's not a really clean straight line, but it makes sense to me.
It's definitely part of it.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Do you have any favorite composers, or what kind of music do you listen to,
I
or
don't.
you only in your own bubble of sound?
Yeah, yeah. I don't listen to composers. I don't listen to music. my approach to making, especially the CD, my approach has been to find a way to make it sound good and honor the source. So that was the beginning. And of course, I had these two musicians on either side. One was a performer. They were both musicians. One, my husband, Seth, was, as you know, a performing musician. And then his best friend, Lance, was a composer as well as a pop musician. So they somehow were able to resolve their different approaches to music. And we all contributed something to this CD. So that's what makes it an unusual and really quite beautiful project, because it acoustically, as a musical work, it really is quite beautiful, I have to say. Like one of the pieces that I sent you, it's called Introplanetary, and I'm reading from my little crib notes here, is a sonic interpretation of the quiet emptiness Cassini experienced on her 10-year gravity-driven slingshot maneuvers that took her by Venus, Earth, and then Jupiter to get to Saturn. So if you can imagine that really quiet space, but you're flying through space. There's a lot of activity in space. Humans can't hear it, but there has to be sound. There's sound everywhere. So that was the idea for that particular track, to capture that.
Although there is a question, and this is a question, which is, if there were not a microphone recording in space, which has its own, would it?
Yeah. Well, you know,
the answer to that.
That's the age-old question, you know, like if a tree falls in a forest, you know, what would you hear?
Although in this case, I actually, well, there's that element, but also the ring, the ring of the microphone itself has a sound because it's metal in space.
Right. It contributes its own acoustics, but it also is based on its technology. It captures the sound in a very specific way, depending upon the type of microphone you choose. So, you know, the human is already defining what we want to hear based on what we're accustomed to hearing. But excuse me. The thing of it is that there's sound everywhere. It's just that we want to have it translated so that we can hear it, and so that our ears can perceive it, but also we want to hear it in a way that we're accustomed to hearing. So our contemporary listening style I think is most likely very different than it was generations ago. For example, if you're familiar with this group, a deep listening group, and those are people that really spend concentrated time just listening to the sound of your refrigerator humming, to your environment, and concentrating on what kind of bird is that's you hear peeping in the very distance, or as you're walking through space, the sound of the wind blowing against your hair. Really concentrating on the micro motions in the world, not necessarily the intentional sonic elements, but the things that we take for granted, really. And I think that's sort of what I've stumbled into by recording the Eiffel Tower, or capturing the sounds of Saturn's rings. These I think of are as the unheard, things that we don't intend to listen to, that don't normally produce a sound, that we have to find a way to discover it and unearth the sound. So that's my shtick.
What do you think about that, Davey?
I'm totally d'accord, as they say in French.
He's
Right
fine.
D'accord total. Complètement d'accord. Okay. Yeah.
And I'm wondering, did you, since we have had such a carefully crafted month of career counseling advisors on our show, did you get the email I sent about 3 hours ago or 2 hours ago about China, about any of those things of Jack's to read, or if you feel like it?
No, I was watching my emails before I got on and I didn't see anything.
Well, in that case, you already read your beautiful liner notes. Maybe, would it be possible? I was thinking, Pamela, since we have so many people that go on Zoom every week and finally can get on, and sitting there hoping maybe they could have some of our guests and some of China's friends who are watching ask a question or say hello.
May we start with Hassan, because Hassan sent a few notes when you were talking earlier. Hassan is texting us during the show. And also I want to say, Hassan, hot child in the city. Hassan has a new background. He was always hyper intelligent with all of his books, like the master soul of the library. And now he has a backdrop.
Well, that was
gone Hollywood on us. What city is that?
That's Minneapolis. I went to graduate school there. It's a city I love. I can bring it back for 1 second. I think it's going to obscure Dorothea, but so we can't have it for too long. And I just, okay, see, she's gone. She's we've never both gone to Minneapolis together. So it's just that.
Hi, Dorothea.
No, I just put that up. It's just because I teach I teach on Zoom entirely now, which the one thing I like about it, I told my students this, I said, the one thing I like about it is the moment class is over, I'm home, And one guy said, you're the only professor I have who actually shuts the class off instead of waiting for all of us to leave the room. And I just said, well, it's like being home, it's anyway, but that's another thing. But I just use a different background every week. I'll show you some of the different ones here. I'm going to have to obscure Dorothea again, but this
I was going to follow you for your intellect, but go on.
Well, I just want to show you. No, this is
fascinated
stuff, because after Keir Delay was on, I got this one.
Oh, right.
Nice.
And I got this one. And I got this one. Could not resist it because
China, what do you think? China Blue must love those too. Wow.
11, 12 years old, Keir Delay's face was in my dreams. I mean, I could not actually believe I was in the same Zoom room as him. It was just like, okay.
We're here to make dreams come true, Hassan.
So anyway, no, I just texted. Okay, anyway, digressions like crazy. But no, the texts were that Roger Burnell died on January the 1st. I don't know if you heard that.
I did. We're having a whole celebration for him, for Lowell Celebrates Kerouac. And next, our final version, Paul Marion's going to come on. And he, of course, he was the other person who kept the Quebecois culture alive in Lowell. And as a professor, when he taught it at the beautiful Lowell branch of Massachusetts University. And Roger was incredible. And
China, you probably don't know about all this, but it's just that because of Kerouac's hometown that David has had ties in longer. But I grew up an hour and a half from there, and it's not, it's have you been to Woonsocket, Rhode Island, China?
Yes, I have.
I mean, it's still full of French stuff, and
definitely.
They taught French in the parochial schools in Woonsocket. I mean, it was still a French-speaking city in the 1960s. As recently as that. I mean, I was alive when it was a French-speaking city. It's and Roger Burnell. I mean, I told Paul Marion that because I was corresponding with him a little while. He made us. I gave this this sort of brief sort of talk lunch seminar thing about Kerouac for Carolina Public Humanities a couple of weeks ago, and Paul Marion showed up in the audience, and I said, well, Paul Marion's here, we have to let him on, and we did. And he told me afterwards Roger Burnell had died. And I said, well, Roger Burnell, my first research trip, my first trip to hang out in Lowell and feel what it was like and look through papers and stuff, the Franco-American history, Roger Burnell met with me and spent hours with me.
Wow.
and he told me, I mean, because he's still, he grew up when Lowell was French speaking, when 20, probably 20% of the population spoke French in Lowell at that time, you know, in the 1930s. And I told Paul, I said, he didn't just tell me about it. He made me, he conveyed to me what it felt like, what Franco-American Lowell felt like, you know, because he was just so exuberant and gestural and expressive and full of all, I mean, his words weren't just words. Every word was a performance of Roger Brunel, you know, it's just, and I mean, he gave me such a, it resonated because I grew up around a lot of French Canadians who were still French speaking in Northeast Connecticut. I grew up about 45 minutes from Providence, China, actually.
What town?
You'd never heard of it. It's called Scotland, Connecticut. It's still most famous to this day for being in 1980, the first to hold the first Ku Klux Klan rally north of the Mason-Dixon line since the 1920s. And
I was gonna say this. Boo, boo.
I know. Only about 2 years ago, I found out that David Duke himself organized the rally. But people, I mean, I made friends with somebody on Facebook just like 4 weeks ago, and he said, Scotland, Connecticut, Ku Klux Klan. I said, that was 1980. You know, but you do something like that, you never live it down. It was a town of 900 people when I left it. And I hitchhiked across the country with On the Road in my backpack. In 1980. Jim, I did the same thing you did. I was a little bit older. I was after 2 years of college, hitchhiked to California. I was at my job in Santa Cruz in September of 1980 in Scotland, Connecticut. Nobody's heard of it even 20 miles away. Scotland, Connecticut. 900 people at the time. There were thousands of, there were about 10,000 cows. 900 people and 10,000 cows. And I was so happy to leave it behind. You know, I was 3,000 miles away. So that meant, you know, however many times 20 that there is in 3,000, that many times people had never heard of Scotland, Connecticut. So Pacifica radio's on when I'm at work in September of 1980, and I hear Scotland, Connecticut. What? The first Ku Klux Klan rally north of the Mason-Dixon line. That's where I'm from, you know.
Oh, wow.
My immigrant parents decided to live in a town where anyway, that's another story.
Where did you immigrate from, Hassan?
I didn't immigrate from anywhere. My father immigrated from Egypt.
Okay.
And my mother from Holland.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's why, yeah, what an incredible combination.
Yeah.
I guess you're white enough to live where you came from. It's a terrible, terrible thing to say. Just trying to be humorous. There's no humor. Okay, can we jump off of that subject?
The other thing I put in the chat is that Lawrence Ferlinghetti was a graduate of UNC in 1941. Yeah.
Is that where you went, Dorothea?
We both teach there. We both teach at UNC.
Oh,
we're sitting in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where Lawrence lived for 4 years.
You must be those elites we hear about. The intellectual elite.
Yeah. So no, he came here.
Brava. Yeah.
He came here because Thomas Wolfe had gone here, and he wanted to be a writer, and that's where he graduated in I mean, how many years ago was that? 80 years ago, 1941. The library. Yeah, we have here. Yes.
Wait, all the intellectuals are like, wait a second, do you have a calculator?
We have a great
We're readers here.
No, we have a huge collection of beat materials and special collections here at the library because it had a lot to do with Lawrence Ferlinghetti. It was McNamara. You asked me a few weeks ago who the curator was, Jim. It was McNamara, Charles McNamara, who was the curator, who retired right after I got to UNC.
Yeah. Yeah.
I never actually met him because he retired right after I arrived here. And yeah, so but he made arrangements first with Ferlinghetti and then with a lot of other stuff, and mostly published beat materials. And it is one of the, if not the largest collection of published beat materials. And it's like everything. We do have a copy of the original mimeographed Howl. We have like all of these offset print beat publications from the late 50s and 60s, like every issue of Floating Bear, you know, we have all of that here.
What is Floating Bear? You're like, what is Floating Bear?
It's a magazine that was published in New York City by Leroy Jones and Diane DePrima.
Okay.
Published on, I think, Mimeograph. I think they did some Mimeograph and some Offset. I mean, it's just.
Was that before or after Eugen?
After.
Or during?
After
or
Eugen.
After.
Yeah.
After.
Just after Eugen. And Leroy had just, I think this was kind of the tail end of his marriage to Hetty, and he was having an affair with Diane. Anyway, we don't need to get into that part.
Yeah, that has come up.
I stepped into that one last time.
Yeah, I was like, oh.
I mean, Hetty's a friend, and she speaks frankly about this, but I never feel I have a right to gossip about things people have told me. I mean, this is what happens in people's lives. It's just, but yeah, we have some original materials. And David, remember when you came down here? We collect North Carolina writers, and David Amram's grandmother, Beulah Amram, was a North Carolina resident.
Yeah. Beulah Berlowski, born in Cameron, North Carolina.
So does that mean that David Amram ranks over there at the university now? He's got some cred. He's got some local cred. By the way, I have
she has some cred. I didn't write her book about ancient art and her poetry. It was in Atlantic Monthly in 1911. That's even though 90, that's way before I was born. She's got some cred. And a whole ton of composers and writers, Charles Mills, who's a native of North Carolina, and a ton of other people also. So for those people who think everything south of New Jersey is hillbilly junction moronic land, that's your constitutional right to be ill-informed, but there's something known as south of the Mason-Dixon line, without which we wouldn't have a country. And the people of color, the African-American geniuses of art, music, poetry, and literature, and those of the Caucasian persuasion, all the great writers and opera composers like Carlisle Floyd and other people, we wouldn't have any culture at all if it wasn't for the North and the South. And that's the one place where we can think, what an amazing, and Jack Kerouac lived 12 years in Florida, and his sister lived in North Carolina, and it's always a joy to go down there to see Hassan and his wonderful wife and improve my Hochdeutsch, or try to. And I wanted to ask if Murray comes on every week and never gets a chance to say anything except hello, and then we have to cut off. And also, as China's friends are there, I don't know if Anthony has time or not to look. If any of China's friends are on the Zoom, they might want to say something too, because they're old friends.
I think most people are streaming, David, rather than actually being with us here on Zoom.
Well, that's fine. I can't see that, but if Anthony could see on his magical screen some people.
Yes, I think we're going to go to Anthony, and we're going to play some of China Blues. A new word for music, sound, art.
Music describes it.
So because China was moving and everything, we didn't get in touch on which piece is which and define those together. So if Anthony is available, because he has another show on right now too.
If he's not available, China, can you tell us how to find some of it online? And then we can do
yes.
that.
And what kind of information do you need?
Anything of your music that we could get online, since the sound man is doing somewhere else.
And your website?
Oh, you want to know what my website is?
Yes.
So we can hear your music.
ChinaBlueArt.com.
This is the 2 minutes, I think. Mm-hmm.
This piece is introplanetary, and it's the one that I described earlier. It's a very short piece, and it didn't finish.
But it sounds great. It takes you right there.
It just stopped.
Okay.
Could you play it again? That's the hardest thing for composers.
Play it again, Sam.
All right. Play it again. Here he goes.
Take two. That was John Cage. That was John Cage's 7 minutes of silence. We don't count that. Anyway,
Yeah.
China, can
That
people,
was like getting a room tone on a set.
can people hear that and other Orville music online? Do they go on? You were going to
There's
say your
Wi-Fi
website. Could you say that again? You got to.
Wi-Fi issues.
That doesn't matter. It's called
Yes,
China.
you know what, love?
Tell us your website number. People can look it up for the next 10 years online.
Yeah, my website is chinablueart.com.
ChinaBlueArt.com. Everybody
Yeah.
got a pencil? China Blue Art.
Hopefully you don't need a pencil for that.
And ChinaBlueArt.com, and you
Right.
won't be disappointed.
No, and there's a drop down where you'll find the Cassini's dreams.
It's all freezing, so video can't catch like the MP3. I mean, if anyone can anyone hear me? Okay, so I'd like to say that China Blue is the former Norman Prince Neurosciences Institute artist in residence. Did you enjoy doing that?
Oh, it was amazing.
She's frozen.
I'm not frozen.
No.
No, it was excuse me. I was invited to be a artist in residence at a hospital, working with a neuroscientist, and this one wasn't my husband, but this was one a gentleman that was focusing on Alzheimer's, and he was trying to find this. He was hoping that he would find a way to identify Alzheimer's by looking at your eyes. And the reason why is, and I found this really fascinating, is because the eyes are the only exterior access to the brain. It's only through the eye socket that one can reach the brain.
Hear about iridology? Yeah. Do you know about iridology?
What's iridology?
Well, Bernard Jensen was a nutritionist that discovered that the eyes and all of the sections on the eyes relate to the organs of the body, and was able to prove by doing cleanses using green juice and carrot juice, cleansing certain organs, that the little black spots that might be there from if they were taking medication or if they had a kidney issue, that you could see it in the eye. And he treated the eyes and then created a big giant fat textbook called Iridology.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, this guy was looking at the structure of the eyes, and the other interesting thing about the eyes is the pattern of everybody's eye pattern is different. I think I should say that everybody has a unique eye pattern. It's like a thumbprint.
Yeah.
And I think we know that from when you see security cameras now, they can look into your eye and identify you based on your eye pattern. That's because your eye patterns are unique. And so he was interested in looking at the actual patterns and finding the nuances and trying to find similarities and differences amongst people. So it was this research. I'm fascinated by anything that has to do with Alzheimer's. And that's because my grandmother passed from it. And so anybody who has that experience has this sense of foreboding that maybe you've inherited it because it's theoretically inheritable. So it's always something that's on my shoulder. Oh my God, when I get old, will I forget I ever existed? And so I'm always paying attention to the latest research. And so it was really good to really get in the thick of things with him. But what happened was, of course, as an artist, I wanted to find ways to learn from what he was doing. And I discovered that part of my process was to be involved in the research. And that's another little tangent that's starting to evolve in the visual art realm, is the visual artist as a researcher, which doesn't have a really defined parameter right now. It's just starting to pop up and be referenced. And so I guess, I would fit into that somehow. But what I ended up doing was working with the neuroscientist, and we
That
came
was
up
like
with
some sound art right there from Jim Canary. Yay, Jim Canary sound art!
we came up with a way to make the actual protein to make it as a 3D print. So this is the protein that causes Alzheimer's. So I was
Say
able to.
what? This is
Yeah,
incredible.
I was able to make it. It was I have to say, the first time ever. I even got cited in a paper for this, a scientific journal.
This is
Thank you,
amazing.
Dorothea. And it's interesting because you can hold it in your hand, turn it around, and see all of its nuances. And Seth discovered that when the power of 3D printing for scientists, when 3D printing just started to pop up, and he was concerned about a particular part of the brain of a bat. And so he took that shape, he 3D printed it, and when it came out, you could turn it around. Instead of looking at photographs or looking at scans of some sort, you can get a true 3-dimensional view of what was going on. And as a result, he was going, oh my God, now I understand why. It was because he had all the information, finally.
He has all the information because he could see all around the bat.
All the different angles, yeah.
Yeah. But I have a question. Did you ever see him and Batman in the same room?
Well, when Batman was on television, yes.
We actually are able to try to play some music again, and we'd love to do that. The Homens Ballet.
Okay, before you turn it on, I have a little an intro to it, because as soon as you turn it on, I can't read my screen. So let me give you the intro to Homens Ballet. Homens Ballet is Cassini's Homens Ballet, Cassini's complex gravity-dependent orbits put her and our ears swinging around and past the rings, plunging through the crystalline sounds of ice crystals and dust particles as they hit the spacecraft. So it's from the viewpoint of the spacecraft, and what if the spacecraft had ears, what it would hear.
I love this already. Are you ready, Anthony? Go.
That part is sending data home.
Mm, beautiful.
Okay, I'm gonna tell you something, girl. You made me feel like a spaceship. You know, in the chorus lines, like it didn't feel like the table. I felt like the spaceship. That was
Oh,
amazing.
nice.
They're terrific. And
Uh,
folks, remember, if you think, if you, if you say, well, wait a minute, what's that got to do with the United States? Sun Ra had his famous motto was "Space is the place," and
Yep.
he made extraordinary recordings in the 1950s and 60s, and his band is still playing. Marshall Allen, 95 years old, still runs it, and his music was dedicated to that, and he felt he was in contact with all of that, and
He was
could
born on Saturn.
he could predict the weather. He was an amazing person, and he was one of the many people that was interested in that a long time ago. So what China's doing is her way, not copying him or anybody, her way of dealing with that. And that's a terrific thing. And for all the electronic composers, this means you can open up the doors and find your way of using technology or what falls across your path, just as she did with the Eiffel Tower, and put that in your work. And composers and musicians and painters and cooks and athletes, everyone has to act at the moment and take what seems to be an accident or not related. Franz Klein taking part of a Chinese menu, putting it on an illuminating thing, everybody laughing and him saying, wait a minute, man, this is beautiful. And because of that accident, started his famous black and white abstractionist work. We can use all those things in life. And that's what one thing that Kerouac taught everybody, to pay attention to everything around you, to every person who crosses your path. And it's amazing what you can come up with by doing that and being that way. And it's not that hard. All you have to do is have an open mind, pay
Oh,
attention.
oh, we forgot to pay attention to Norton Wisdom. We almost forgot you, Norton. What was the fabulous thing with the boy? Was that with the scroll? Oh, it's changed now. Oh, what's going on, Norton? Hello.
There's Saturn in the upper left. Do you see that? There's Saturn.
Oh, all right.
That is super cool.
Terrific.
You know, I would like to know if we could hear Norton speak for a second, because I would like to ask you, Norton, to say a word on Lawrence Ferlinghetti, please. Sir, we can call him sir if we want to.
Oh,
Did you disappear? Hello.
no is the answer.
No.
I'm deep listening right at this moment.
You're deep listening mode. We feel you. Wow.
But it's been a great journey as usual.
Thank you,
you.
Norton.
And Blue, and Blue, that was
Steve has been
Blue,
so
that was-
quiet. A word from Steve Eddington before we say our salutations.
It's been a good. I can just come on for just a second here. Thank you, Pam. I wanted to mention, David, when he was reading, he mentioned Roger Brunel, and I see Hassan posted up that we've lost a very wonderful man and the founder of Lowell Celebrate Kerouac. And this October, when we have presumably have our on-site festival again, if the pandemic allows it, we're dedicating our 2021 LCK festival to the life and memory of a very wonderful man, Roger Brunel, and we'll be having a special recognition for him at that time. And I know David's going to be there for that as well. So thank you for giving me the time just to mention that. I know, just hold Roger and his family in your hearts, if you would. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We will, Steve. Thank
That
you.
was Steve Eddington, folks, the former president of Lowell Celebrates Kerouac, a wonderful writer about Jack, a book about an ex-minister who put out his work about Jack Kerouac's spirituality and what they call the real deal. Thank you for coming on.
It looks like it's time to say goodnight, David.
Well,
You gonna play us out?
Oh, I'd be happy to. I just, first of all, wanted to thank Hassan, one of our great scholars, and his wife. It's so nice that they could be on the program. And if any of you go to North Carolina and go to the university, you'll see what an extraordinary school that is. And if you're lucky enough, you can go to the Carborough Center and hang out, see some of the greatest art, music, poetry, jazz, dance, anywhere. And also, if you can take Hassan's classes, you'll learn a whole lot. He's a wonderful scholar and a wonderful mentor, not only to his students, but to anybody who crosses his path. That's what you call a real teacher, a real professor, someone who really teaches and shares knowledge with others. And also, of course, to thank you, Pamela, for what you've been doing for so many months, and the amazing Anthony Demarbiex, who comes in at a moment's notice and does the impossible, for Norton Wisdom, who makes those beautiful, beautiful drawings, Jim Canary. And our guest next week is going to be a young fellow you've heard so much about, the first guest on our program to sound it up, James Canary himself, the preserver of the scroll. And he can say all kinds of stuff about Kerouac that no one else knows because he's living with him every day with those beautiful scrolls that he takes care of. And also our very, very special guest, China Blue, composer, scientist, aware person who's a great role model for any man or woman in this country to pursue what you love to do, to never give up and keep on doing the best that you can.
Thank
So
you,
we would
China.
I'd
Oh,
like to
thank
play
you.
something on the piano, and then
Thank you so much for having me.
and we hope to see you all next week. Please be creative. Tell your friends to be creative. Read books, listen to music, do something creative yourself. And if someone tells you you suck, you're not entitled to do anything. There's no demographics for art, music, poetry, theater. They have a constitutional right to feel that way, but hang out with somebody else, please. Let me play this on the piano because we almost have it hooked up. Here we go. Well, we hate to rush off like this when the pot is swinging, but we think it's time to finally say goodnight. Yes, Lowell celebrates Kerouac, and we do every Sunday night. So we hope that you don't think it's a nostalgia show taking you way back. It's simply just an acknowledgement to old Jack Kerouac. And if you like him, you can be creative yourself and put that self video on someone else's shelf, because you can do it too. Anything that comes your way could end up being precious and valuable someday. And being creative and friendly and open is not a crime, cause as Charlie Parker said, now's the time. So we bid you adieu, since brevity is the soul of wit. I guess this February 28th show is it. We certainly all feel more enlightened and finer, because we've got to hear from the bluest of Madam Blues, Madam China. Blue China Blue is playing for you. And that's just about the best that any of us could ever do. So until we see you again, we want to say amen and say thank you so much. We hope that you'll tell your friends to read a book or paint a picture or any such thing that is creative every day. So we bid you all joy and happiness and share creativity every day. Bonsoir.